Hello, thank you for joining us today. Can you please state your name and your occupation?
Sure, my name is Matt Honohan, and I teach history here at Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Honohan. Where are you originally from?
I grew up here in New Jersey, in Paramus, spent my whole childhood here, and moved around a lot since then.
Okay, how old were you when the Cultural Revolution started?
So when it began, I wasn't born yet. I was born in 1968, which was actually a couple of years after it got going.
Okay, when did you first hear about it, or did you hear about it as a teenager?
So, probably did not know very much about it at all as a kid. It's not something you would have necessarily heard about on the news or anything like that. Maybe by the time I was in high school in the 80s, and then we're actually studying China a little bit, is probably the first time I'd ever heard of it.
Okay. When was it that you first started studying the Cultural Revolution?
Really, probably when I was in grad school. Because I was studying international relations. I wound up studying East Asian history quite a lot back then, and that was when I first started learning about it.
Okay. What about it interested you?
I just think studying China and Chinese history is inherently important. Besides the importance of Chinese history and culture kind of in and of itself, with my own background, like I said, really in international relations as an American, I think China is a country that really everybody here should know a lot about.
All right. What do you think the goal of the revolution was, and do you think there was any positive benefits to it?
That's a good question. My background is as an historian, and especially I'm an historian who reads English language sources. I don't read Chinese, so my analysis of that is very much in that sense. As far as I can tell from my own reading, it was very much driven by Mao's own goals for China and driven very much by ideological goals. This idea of sort of reinvigorating the communist revolution, which he seems to have believed had kind of declined after having been in power for 15 years or so at that point, like 17 years technically at that point. So certainly, in that regard, it depends on how you define success. From a Maoist perspective and trying to really radically change Chinese society, you could say it had some success, except then when you consider once Mao died in 1976, within a couple of years, China went in almost a completely opposite direction. So, as far as I can tell, the long-term repercussions were probably mostly negative.
Right. Personally, do you think that this is the most effective way for the government to keep communistic ideology in China?
Most effective? I think the idea is, I'd have to think about that.
Okay.
I wouldn't say it was successful, and I think the short answer is no. The longer answer I'd have to think about a little bit more.
All right, gotcha.
But mainly I think the challenge is that when you think about the sheer upheaval it created to so many people's lives and the amount of destruction that was sort of left in its wake, it's not surprising that China went in a completely different direction in the 1980s.
Right. As a history teacher, not knowing all this, not knowing that you studied it in college, obviously, as a teacher now and historian, in what ways do you think that the Cultural Revolution indeed affected history?
Wow, another really big question. The biggest thing I'd probably say, as kind of a short answer to a big question, is when you think about where China is today, you really have to look at how the Chinese leadership decided and the Chinese people decided to transform the country in the 80s and 90s into the direction that it kind of is now. And I don't think it's too much to say that so much of where China is today in terms of becoming a more capitalist, market-oriented society, even under the rule of the Communist Party, is very much done as a reaction to a lot of the excesses that occurred during the Cultural Revolution period.
Right. It was a pleasure today having you. Brian and I would like to personally thank you for your time today, and thank you very much. This is the KBBCNN network. Have a good day.